The bridge of the UES Vigilant hummed with its usual activity as Captain Alexandra Alex Morgan settled into her command chair, the soft blue glow of the holographic displays casting shadows across her features. The ship had been patrolling the outer rim of human space for 3 weeks now, a required show of force since their recent admission to the Galactic Consortium. Another riveting day of watching empty space, Lieutenant Commander Jack Hayes muttered from his weapons station, his fingers drumming against the polished surface of his console. Sometimes I wonder if the Consortium gave us this sector because... The bridge fell silent as every display simultaneously flashed red. Chief Scanner Officer Emily Roberts' hands flew across her station's controls, her eyes widening at the data streaming across her screen. Captain, unknown vessel approaching from Vector 227.43, Roberts announced, her voice tight with professional tension. No IFF signal, no recognition codes. And she paused, double-checking her readings. It's not using any known propulsion signature. Morgan leaned forward, her gray eyes narrowing. Show me. The main view screen shifted, revealing a distant point of light moving against the star field. As the computer enhanced the image, the bridge crew drew in a collective breath. The vessel's design was like nothing they'd ever seen. Sleek and predatory, with hull plates that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. Run it against the Consortium database, Morgan ordered, already knowing the answer. Their membership had given them access to records of every known species ship designs. No matches, Captain, Roberts confirmed. But there's something else. Its course. It's not just passing through. The vector analysis shows it's been making micro-corrections for the past hour, matching our patrol route exactly. Hayes' hand moved to his weapons console. It's hunting us. Stand down, Lieutenant Commander, Morgan said, though she didn't disagree with his assessment. First contact protocols are still in effect. Open a channel, all frequencies, universal greeting package. Communications Officer David Chen's fingers danced across his console. Channel open. Broadcasting UGT. Wait. His console chirped. Captain, we're receiving a signal. It's... He frowned, adjusting his controls. It's using Earth standard frequencies. Military band. Morgan felt the hair on the back of her neck rise. No one outside the Earth Defense Force should know those frequencies. Source. The unknown vessel, Ma'am. But the signal, it's like nothing I've ever seen. The encryption is, I can't even begin to describe it. It's years beyond our current capabilities. Tactical analysis, Morgan barked, her mind racing through possibilities. None of them good. Hayes' response was immediate. Hull configuration suggests heavy armor, but the material composition is reading as error. Our sensors can't get a lock on it. Multiple weapon ports detected, but they're unlike any design we've encountered. Energy readings are off the scale, but fluctuating in patterns that make no sense. Morgan stood, moving to the central display. The mystery ship had drawn closer, and now they could see details that only added to their unease. The hull bore signs of battle damage, scars and burns that looked disturbingly familiar. Those impacts, Hayes said, voicing what they were all thinking. They match the pattern of our quantum torpedo detonations, but that's impossible. We've never engaged this ship. Captain, Roberts called out, her voice shaking slightly. I'm detecting no life signs aboard. But the ship is fully powered, and there's something else. The quantum dating of the hull material. She looked up, face pale. It hasn't been built yet. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. Morgan squared her shoulders, making the decision that would change not just their lives, but the course of human history. Battle stations, she ordered, her voice steady. But keep weapons cold. Lieutenant Chen, keep trying to decode that signal. Roberts, I want every piece of data you can give me about that ship. Hayes, plot is an intercept course, but maintain safe distance. Whatever this thing is, wherever it came from, it found us for a reason. And I mean to find out why. The red alert klaxon began its rhythmic wail as the crew sprang into action. As Morgan watched the mysterious vessel draw closer, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to step into something far bigger than a simple first contact scenario. She had no idea how right she was. The distress beacon's message cut through the tense atmosphere of the bridge like a knife. Captain Morgan's blood ran cold as the heavily encrypted signal finally decoded on their screens. This is UES Nemesis. Warning to all Earth Defense Force vessels. Timestamp: March 15, 2487. That's over 200 years from now, Lieutenant Chen whispered, his fingers frozen over his console. Morgan gripped the rails of her command station. Roberts, verified at signal's point of origin. Confirmed, Captain. It's definitely coming from the unknown vessel. But there's more. The quantum signature is, well, it's like looking at a paradox. The ship exists and doesn't exist simultaneously. Hayes let out a low whistle from his station. A ship from the future. That explains the weapon's scaring, at least. We did hit it with quantum torpedoes. We just haven't done it yet. Medical team standing by in the hangar bay. Dr. Sarah Williams reported over the comm. Though if there are no life signs, keep them ready anyway, Morgan ordered. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, assemble a boarding team. Full combat gear, and I want pattern enhancers. If that ship's quantum state is unstable, we can't risk losing transporter lock. Permission to lead the team myself, Hayes requested, already rising from his station. Morgan nodded. Granted. Take Security Chief Reynolds and pick 4 more. Full quarantine protocols. As Hayes left the bridge, Morgan turned to the main viewer. The Nemesis had drawn close enough now that they could see the full extent of the battle damage. The hull was scared with dozens of impacts, some bearing the distinctive spiral burns of their own weapons, others different, alien. Some of the damage patterns seemed to defy physics, areas where the metal appeared to both melt and crystallize simultaneously. Boarding team ready, Hayes' voice crackled over the comm. Beginning transport in 3, 2, 1. The bridge crew held their breath as the team materialized inside the future vessel. Static filled the channel for a moment before Hayes' voice returned. We're in some kind of command center. Environmental systems are functional. Gravity nominal. There was a pause. Captain, you're going to want to see this. Report, Lieutenant Commander. The technology here, it's recognizable, but advanced. Like looking at an evolution of our current systems. But the battle damage. Some of these wounds, they're not just on the hull. There are places where space itself seems torn. Robert's console suddenly lit up with new data. Captain, the ship's computer is active. It's trying to interface with our systems. Defensive protocols. Morgan started to order, but Chen cut her off. Ma'am, it's using Earth Defense Force authentication codes. They're unlike anything in our database, but the base structure is the same. It's like looking at our great-great-grandchildren's signatures. Through the comm, they could hear Hayes and his team moving through the ship. We've found the bridge. Main computer core is intact, but there's something odd about the damage patterns in here. It's like parts of the room are out of sync with each other. Some areas look fresh, others aged by centuries. Captain, Reynolds' voice joined the channel. We found the ship's log. You need to see this. Morgan made her decision. Transfer it to our secure server. Chen, begin analysis. Hayes, continue your sweep but watch those temporal anomalies. One wrong step, and you could end up aging 100 years. Understanding temporal physics was never my strong suit, Hayes joked, but his voice was tense. Wait. Movement. The channel filled with the sound of weapons being drawn. Morgan leaned forward. Report. Some kind of holographic system just activated. It's showing. By God, it's showing a battle. The Nemesis, fighting something I can't. Captain, these beings, they're not moving through space like anything I've ever seen. They're moving through time itself. Get out of there, Morgan ordered. But before she could say more, every system on both ships surged with power. A new voice, deep and resonant, filled both vessels. Timeline breach detected. Initialization of emergency protocol Echo 7. The Void Collective has found us again. This time, we must be ready. The future had come calling, and it had brought humanity's worst nightmare with it. Security Chief Marcus Reynolds stood in the Nemesis's command center, his pulse rifle trained on the holographic display that had materialized before the boarding team. The scene playing out was like something from a nightmare. Massive ships that seemed to phase between different states of existence, trading fire with what he now recognized as a fleet of future human vessels. Recording timestamp, December 3rd, 2487. The ship's computer announced, its voice carrying an unsettling echo. Final battle of the temporal war. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stepped forward, his helmet's sensors recording everything. Computer, identify enemy forces. The hologram shifted, focusing on one of the phase-shifting vessels. The Void Collective. Trans-dimensional entities existing in non-linear time. Their first strike eliminated 30% of Earth's population in less than a microsecond. Reynolds watched as the recording showed the Nemesis executing an impossible maneuver, its weapons fire somehow curving through space-time to strike a Void Collective ship in multiple temporal states simultaneously. Captain Morgan, Hayes spoke into his comm. Are you seeing this? Affirmative. Morgan's voice crackled through. Our systems are recording everything. The computer core is downloading combat data, tactical analyses, and warning records. The hologram suddenly expanded, filling the entire bridge with a three-dimensional star chart. Red lines traced through space, showing the Void Collective's attack patterns, not just through space, but through time as well. They don't just travel through space, Reynolds muttered, understanding dawning. They travel through time like we walk through air. That's why we sent the Nemesis back, the computer stated. In our timeline, we discovered their weakness too late. The price of victory was the Earth itself. Private Sarah Cooper, the team's technical specialist, had been scanning the ship's systems. Sir, I'm reading some kind of temporal drive in the engineering section. The technology. It's like looking at a quantum computer after working with an abacus. The drive was our last hope, the computer continued. By the time we developed it, most of the solar system had been temporally fractured. We could only send one ship back. A ship carrying the knowledge of how to fight an enemy that exists in all times at once. Hayes moved to what remained of the captain's chair, his hand passing through several temporal distortions around it. What happened to the crew? They never existed, the computer replied. The temporal drive's activation erased them from time itself. Their sacrifice ensured the ship would reach this point in history. Reynolds' scanner suddenly beeped a warning. Sir, these temporal distortions are spreading. The whole ship is beginning to shift between time states. The timeline is already changing, the computer warned. Your detection of this vessel has accelerated events. The Void Collective will sense the temporal anomaly. They will come earlier than in our timeline. How long? Hayes demanded. Unknown. But this ship contains everything you need. Weapons capable of affecting trans-temporal beings. Shields that can withstand attacks from multiple time states. And most importantly, the tactical data that cost us everything to gather. Captain Morgan's voice cut through the comm again. Hayes, get your team back here. The temporal distortions are growing stronger. We're detecting timeline fluctuations throughout the sector. As the team moved to their extraction point, Reynolds paused, looking back at the holographic battle still playing out. "We beat them in your timeline." "Yes," the computer responded, "but the cost was too high. This time, you have a chance to save not just humanity, but time itself." The team materialized back on the Vigilance transport pad just as another temporal wave washed through space. Through the view screen, they watched as parts of the Nemesis shifted between different states of decay, its hull simultaneously new and ancient. Timeline alteration at 15%, and rising. The computer's voice now echoed through both ships. "We'd have hours, perhaps days, before they notice. Use the time wisely. The future is in your hands now." Hayes looked at his captain, both of them understanding the weight of what they'd discovered. They had a future ship, future technology, and future knowledge. What they didn't have was future time. The clock was already ticking. Captain Morgan stood before the assembled senior staff in the Vigilance briefing room, the holographic display showing the data retrieved from the Nemesis. The room was silent as they watched footage of Earth, their Earth, being torn apart across multiple timelines simultaneously. "The computer core has given us access to their tactical database," she began, her voice steady despite the horror they'd all just witnessed. "The Void Collective exists in what the future scientists called pan-temporal space. They don't just see through time. They exist in all moments at once." Lieutenant Commander Hayes leaned forward, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the display. "Which makes them nearly impossible to fight. How do you defend against an enemy that can attack you yesterday?" "That's where this gets interesting," Dr. Williams interjected, pulling up her medical analysis. "According to the future data, our linear perception of time, the very thing that makes us primitive in their eyes, is actually our greatest weapon." The display shifted, showing complex temporal mathematics that made most of the staff's heads hurt. Chief Engineer Marcus Thompson pointed at a particular equation. "They see all time at once, but that means they can't focus on a single moment. It's their weakness." "Exactly," Morgan confirmed. "In the original timeline, humanity discovered this too late. The Void Collective had already fractured most of our solar system across multiple time states. The few survivors developed weapons that could target them, but by then, Earth was already lost." Security Chief Reynolds finished, his expression grim. "So they built the Nemesis." Morgan nodded. "A ship designed to travel back in time, carrying everything we'd need to fight them. The temporal drive that powered it required so much energy that it erased its crew from history. A sacrifice they willingly made." The room fell silent as that sank in. Hayes was the first to speak. "The ship's computer said we have days at most before they notice the temporal disturbance. What's our plan?" Morgan activated another display, this one showing modified weapon schematics. "The Nemesis brought us more than warnings. It brought us designs for temporal weapons, shields that can protect against time-based attacks, and most importantly, battle strategies that work." "But there's a catch," Thompson said, reading through the technical data. "These weapons, we can build them with our current technology, but the power requirements are massive. We'd need to modify our entire power grid just to fire one shot." "Then we better work fast," Morgan replied. "Because according to the future data, the Void Collective doesn't just want to conquer us. They want to erase us. Our very existence as linear beings offends them. They see us as a disease in their reality." Dr. Williams pulled up another file. "The temporal physics here are fascinating. When they attack, they don't just destroy. They fracture time itself. Cities, continents, entire planets splintered across thousands of different moments, their populations experiencing the same second over and over or aging centuries in minutes. How do we even begin to fight something like that?" Chen asked from his position near the door. Morgan's expression hardened. We fight them by using their nature against them. They see all time at once. Fine. That means they can see their own defeat just as clearly as their victory. We just have to make sure that defeat becomes the dominant timeline. She stood, looking at each of her senior staff in turn. I won't lie to you. We're about to fight a war against an enemy that makes everything we've faced look like a training exercise. But we have one advantage they don't. We know they're coming. We have their weaknesses, their tactics, and most importantly, we have something worth fighting for. The briefing room's lights suddenly flickered as another temporal wave passed through the ship. Through the window, they could see the Nemesis, parts of its hull shifting between past and future states. Dismissed, Morgan ordered. Thompson, start on those weapon modifications. Williams, I want everything you can tell me about the biological effects of temporal combat. Hayes, get our gunners training on these new combat protocols. We've got less than 48 hours to prepare for an enemy that can attack from any point in time. As her staff filed out, Morgan stared at the image of Earth still rotating on the display. In another timeline, they'd lost everything. This time, they had a chance to change history. They just had to hope it would be enough. Engineering Bay 3 of the UES Vigilant had been transformed into a makeshift temporal weapons lab. Chief Engineer Thompson stood before a partially assembled prototype, his eyes burning from staring at holographic schematics for 18 hours straight. The power coupling's still not holding, he muttered, making another adjustment. If we can't stabilize the temporal field, the whole thing will. A sudden spark erupted from the device, sending everyone diving for cover. When the smoke cleared, they found the prototype had aged 50 years in an instant, now nothing more than a pile of rust. Damn it! Thompson slammed his hand against a workbench. That's the third one. From her position at a nearby console, Lieutenant Emily Tech Wilson looked up. Maybe we're thinking about this wrong. The Nemesis designs assume we have access to quantum stabilizers that won't be invented for another century. But she pulled up a new diagram. What if we used our existing shield harmonics to create a temporal bubble instead? Thompson blinked, then rushed to her station. Show me. On the bridge, Captain Morgan received another update from the Nemesis's computer. Temporal disturbance growing. Estimate 16 hours until detection by void collective forces. Status of the weapons? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Engineering reports limited success. Lieutenant Chen responded. They've managed to modify 2 of our forward torpedo tubes for temporal ordnance, but the power requirements are what, Lieutenant? We'll only get 1 shot per tube before our systems need to recharge. After that, we're looking at a 30-minute cooldown. Morgan nodded grimly. In the original timeline, they'd had an entire fleet of ships equipped with these weapons. Now they had to make do with 2 shots. The turbolift doors opened as Dr. Williams strode onto the bridge. Captain, you need to see this. She pulled up her medical scans on the main display. I've been analyzing the temporal radiation from the Nemesis. The crew wasn't just erased from time. They chose the exact moment of their erasure to power the ship's journey back. What are you saying, Doctor? I'm saying they found a way to weaponize their own temporal dissolution. The energy released when they were erased from history. They harnessed it, used it to push the ship back through time. Morgan's eyes widened as the implications hit her. Can we replicate that effect? Not safely, Williams warned. But I've been working with Lieutenant Wilson. We think we can create a controlled temporal implosion using similar principles. It won't be as powerful, but it might give us more than 2 shots, Morgan finished. Do it. In the ship's armory, Security Chief Reynolds supervised as his teams practiced with modified phase rifles. The weapons had been adjusted to fire bursts that could impact a target across multiple time states, but the temporal kickback was severe. Remember, he called out as another officer was thrown back by their own shot. You're not just aiming at where they are. You're aiming at where they were and will be. Lead your targets through time, not just space. The ship's computer chimed again. Warning. Temporal wake detection systems online. Multiple anomalies detected at edge of sensor range. Estimate 12 hours until first contact with void collective forces. Morgan's voice echoed through the ship's comm system. All hands, this is the captain. In less than 12 hours, we face an enemy that has already destroyed Earth once. But this time, we're ready for them. This time, we know their weaknesses. This time, we fight not just for our present, but for every possible future. In engineering, Wilson finally managed to stabilize the temporal field around their latest prototype. The weapon hummed with power, its core glowing with energy that existed in multiple moments simultaneously. They had 12 hours to prepare for a war against beings that existed outside of time itself. The question wasn't whether they could win. It was whether they could change history enough to matter. The future was coming. And this time, humanity would be ready. The first sign of the Void Collective's arrival wasn't visual. It was a ripple through time itself. Every chronometer on the Vigilant suddenly displayed different times, some racing forward, others spinning backward. Crew members reported experiencing the same moment multiple times, their memories overlapping like double-exposed photographs. Multiple temporal distortions forming. Lieutenant Chen called out, his console flickering between different states. Distance. The distances. He struggled to make sense of the readings. They're 5 light years away, and also right on top of us. Captain Morgan gripped her command chair as reality seemed to flex around them. Engineering. Status of the temporal shields. Online. Thompson's voice crackled through the comm. But we're already at 80% capacity, just keeping the ship in one time stream. Through the main view screen, space itself began to tear. The Void Collective ships emerged like something from a nightmare. Massive vessels that existed in multiple states simultaneously, their hull configurations shifting between different possible designs with each passing second. 5 ships, Hayes reported from Tactical, though his voice wavered as the number changed even as he spoke. No, 8. 3. They're shifting through different timeline possibilities. Remember your training, Morgan called out. Focus on your present moment. That's their weakness. They see too much time at once. We see now. The first attack came from both the future and the past simultaneously. Energy beams that had already hit them and were yet to be fired lanced out from the collective ships. Temporal shield holding, Thompson reported. The modifications are working. Return fire, Morgan ordered. Target the lead vessel's past state. The modified torpedo launched, its warhead glowing with temporal energy. As it approached the enemy ship, it split into multiple versions of itself, each one targeting the same vessel at different points in its timeline. The explosion rippled through time, as well as space. The Void Collective ship shuddered, parts of its hull aging centuries in seconds, while others reverted to their raw materials. Direct hit, Hayes called out. But our temporal weapons are already in cooldown. 30 minutes until... Look, Chen interrupted, pointing at the view screen. The damaged collective ship was trying to phase out of their timeline, but something was wrong. The temporal warhead had created a cascade effect, trapping part of the vessel in linear time. They can't time shift, with part of their ship locked in our present, Wilson reported from engineering. They're vulnerable. Morgan didn't hesitate. All standard weapons target that temporal anchor point. Fire everything we've got. Conventional phasers and torpedoes slammed into the time-locked section of the enemy ship. Without its ability to exist across multiple moments, that one point became its fatal weakness. The vessel shuddered, then imploded into a singularity that pulled all of its time states into a single final moment. But their victory was short-lived. The other collective ships had already adapted, their configurations changing to counter the temporal strategy that had just worked. "They're launching some kind of temporal dispersal field," Chen warned. "If it hits US engineering." Morgan cut in. "Initialize the temporal implosion device." "But Captain," Wilson protested, "it hasn't been tested. The calculations are all we've got." "Do it now." The device activated, creating a controlled temporal collapse around the Vigilant. As the enemy weapon hit, instead of fracturing the ship across time, the energy was absorbed and redirected. "It's working," Wilson exclaimed. "We're converting their temporal attack into power for our own weapons." Morgan allowed herself a grim smile. "Send a message to the collective ships. All frequencies, all time states. Let them see what humanity can do when we're backed into a corner." The battle was far from over. The remaining collective ships were already shifting through new tactical patterns, testing their defenses. But they'd proven something critical. The Void Collective could be hurt, could be stopped. Time itself might flow through their veins, but humanity had something they didn't: the ability to focus on a single moment, to make that moment count. And in this moment, they were going to fight. The bridge of the Vigilant shook as another temporal attack phased through their shields. Red warning lights bathed the crew in their crimson glow as multiple systems reported critical failures across different time states. "Port shield generator has failed," Chen called out. "Or will fail. The temporal damage is making it hard to." "Focus on the now," Morgan commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos. "What's our status in this moment?" 3 Void Collective ships still engage, Hayes reported. "They're adapting to our temporal weapons, shifting their attack patterns through different probability streams." Lieutenant Wilson's voice crackled through the comm from engineering. "Captain, I've been analyzing their attack patterns through the Nemesis's combat data. There's something we missed." "Make it quick, Lieutenant." The Void Collective doesn't just see all time at once. They have to see all time at once. They can't focus on a single moment even if they wanted to. "But the Galactic Consortium ships." Morgan's eyes widened as she understood. They each perceive time differently. Every species has their own temporal reference point. She slammed the ship-wide comm button. "All hands, prepare for temporal sync burst. Divert all power to the main deflector." The remaining consortium ships had been hanging back, their weapons proving useless against the time-shifting enemy. Now Morgan's voice rang across all channels. "This is Captain Alexandra Morgan of the UES Vigilant to all consortium vessels. Synchronize your shield harmonics with the following frequency pattern. Each species must maintain their native temporal perception. Do not attempt to match ours." Through the view screen, they watched as the diverse fleet of alien ships adjusted their systems. The crystalline vessels of the Enix Theory, the organic ships of the Zell Collective, the phase-shifted hulls of the Quantum Alliance, each one resonating at their own species' unique temporal frequency. "Now, Lieutenant Wilson." The Vigilant's deflector dish released a massive burst of temporal energy, but instead of attacking the Void Collective directly, it connected with each consortium ship's shields, creating a web of intersecting temporal fields. "It's working," Wilson shouted. "Each species' different perception of time is creating multiple fixed points in spacetime. The Void Collective can't phase through them all at once." The enemy ships suddenly found themselves trapped in a network of conflicting time streams, unable to shift between moments as easily as before. Their fluid movement through time became jerky, constrained. "All ships, open fire," Morgan ordered. "Every species, every weapon type, everything you've got." The space around the Void Collective ships erupted with energy as dozens of different weapon types, each operating on different temporal principles, slammed into their now vulnerable hulls. Unable to shift through all the different time streams at once, the enemy vessels began to break apart. Their temporal core is destabilizing, Hayes reported, as the first enemy ship imploded. The overlapping attack patterns are creating some kind of cascade effect. The second ship tried to retreat, attempting to phase backward through time, but the web of consortium temporal fields prevented their escape. They watched as it too succumbed to the combined assault, its hull shattering across multiple time states at once. The final vessel launched a desperate attack, trying to fracture the very space around the fleet. But now the combined forces of the consortium stood together, each species' unique temporal signature reinforcing the others, creating a defense the Void Collective had never encountered in any timeline. Last enemy ship breaking up, Hayes announced as the final vessel disappeared in atemporal implosion. All three targets eliminated. The bridge fell silent as the reality of what they'd just accomplished sank in. In the original timeline, this battle had ended with Earth's destruction. Now, thanks to the combined forces of multiple species, they'd won without losing a single ship. Morgan stood, straightening her uniform. Send a message to all consortium vessels. The Void Collective will return with a larger force, but now we know how to fight them. Together, as each species, in our own time, in our own way. The future had changed. And this time, humanity had shown the galaxy that their greatest strength wasn't just their ability to fight, it was their ability to unite others in a common cause. The war was far from over, but the first battle had been won. The aftermath of the battle left the space around the Vigilant scared with temporal anomalies. Reality itself seemed to shimmer as the combined fleet of consortium vessels held position, their different temporal fields creating a symphony of time signatures that kept the local space stabilized. Captain Morgan stood in the Nemesis's command center one last time, watching as the future ship's hull continued to phase between different states of existence. The computer's voice, now fragmented across multiple time streams, echoed through the empty corridors. Timeline alteration at 78%, it announced. The future we fled. It's changing. The original sequence of events has been irrevocably altered. What does that mean for your ship? Morgan asked, already suspecting the answer, as she watched parts of the vessel become translucent. The Nemesis was built in a future that no longer exists. As the new timeline solidifies, we will fade. Our purpose has been fulfilled. Lieutenant Wilson worked at a nearby console, frantically trying to download the last of the ship's technical database. But there's still so much we could learn from you. The temporal drive alone cooled would create the same future we sought to prevent. The computer interrupted. Some knowledge must be earned in its own time. The temporal drive's existence is what drew the Void Collective's attention in the first place. Hayes entered the bridge, his expression grim. Captain, the Consortium Council is requesting your presence. They're having trouble processing everything that's happened. Morgan nodded. Tell them I'll be there shortly. She turned back to the fading ship. Is there anything else we need to know before you? Only this, the computer responded, its voice growing fainter. In our timeline, humanity fought alone. We never thought to unite the different temporal perceptions of other species. Your solution. It created a defense the Void Collective never saw coming, never could see coming. Wilson's console sparked as another section of the ship phased out of existence. Captain, we're losing her. The temporal field is collapsing. It's all right, Lieutenant, Morgan said softly. Let her go. She's earned her rest. Through the view screen, they could see the consortium fleet, ships of every design and origin. Their crews all processing time in their own unique ways, creating a defense greater than any single species could have managed alone. The Void Collective will return, Hayes said, stating what they all knew. And next time, they'll be ready for our tactics. No, Morgan replied, a slight smile playing at her lips. They won't. because they can't focus on just one possible future. They have to see all of them. And now, thanks to the combined fleet, there are too many possibilities for them to process. The computer's voice came one last time, barely a whisper. Timeline stabilization completing. The future is in your hands now. Make it a good one. With that, the Nemesis faded from existence, taking with it the last remnants of a future that would never come to pass. All that remained were the lessons they'd learned, the alliances they'd forged, and the knowledge that together they could stand against any enemy, even one that existed outside of time itself. Morgan tapped her comm badge. Signal the Consortium Council. Tell them that humanity is ready to share everything we've learned. Not just about fighting the Void Collective, but about working together across all our different perceptions of time. As she walked off the now empty space where the Nemesis had been, Morgan paused for one last look. The ship had come from a future where humanity had fought alone and lost everything. Instead, it had given them the chance to create a future where no species would ever have to stand alone again. Time itself had been changed. And this time, the future looked brighter than ever. The end.